Hello interwebs, welcome to Adamant IT, where today I'm going to be showing you the Geekom A9 Max mini PC. Now, I've seen a few mini PCs in for repair and service, but I haven't really spent a lot of time using them. So when Geekom reached out to me and said, hey, this is our new model, can we send you a free sample and you do a gaming performance review of it? I was like, sure, yeah, I'm really interested to see how these things actually perform and what they're good at. So let's start with a quick overview of the build quality, the layout and the specs, and then I'm going to run a couple of different games of varying intensity and see what I would use this for. So let's start with the packaging of this. The A9 Max is an aluminium box that's a little over 5.5 inches square and it's just under 2 inches tall. So it feels compact and premium. On the front we've got 4 USB 3 10 gigabit ports and there's a headphone jack and the power button. And then on the sides we've got these big vents with a Kensington lock on one side and an SD card reader on the other side. Then moving around to the back, we've got 2 USB 4 40 gigabit ports, dual HDMI 2.0, dual 2.5 gig Ethernet, and another 10 gig USB port, and also a token USB 2 port. We've also got the DC jack here as well. At the core of the A9 Max is AMD's new Ryzen AI9HX 470 CPU, which is a 12-core, 24-thread CPU that can push up to 5.2 GHz. This unit also came with 32 gigs of DDR5 5600 and a 2TB SSD, so we've got the bones of a great gaming machine here. For graphics though, it's sporting a Radeon 890M integrated GPU, and when we're talking about games performance, that doesn't really sound like a powerhouse, but it's actually the same class of GPU that you'd find in a lot of handheld PCs designed specifically for gaming. So that's how I'm going to approach this review. Is this thing a gaming PC killer? No, it's not. But if you like the idea of a handheld because of the low power and compact size, but you would want a big screen keyboard and mouse, well, this has got you covered, and it's got huge amounts of connectivity on it as well. This will do all of the same light gaming that handhelds will do, plus it's got all of the networking and I/O that a small workstation would have. So although we're going to be looking at gaming performance today, I think it's worth keeping in mind that this can be doing a lot more than just running games as well, especially if you start taking into account the use case of having it connected to a TV where it could be doing all of your media playback as well. Disassembly is fairly straightforward. Removing the 4 rubber feet reveal the cover screws, then you can pop off that cover to reveal a Wi-Fi antenna plate. Another 4 screws and you get access to 2 DDR5 SODIMM slots, dual M.2 slots, and the Wi-Fi card. The RTC battery is also here if you need to do a BIOS reset. If you want to go deeper for cooling system maintenance, the motherboard is held in by these 4 standoffs, and after that you can carefully pry out the motherboard and that will get you to the large blower fan and heatsink that is cooling this CPU. Under gaming loads, that fan will spool up a fair amount, but because it's got a decent amount of size to it, it's going to be a nice steady background whoosh and not the high-pitched whine that you'll get from a laptop or a handheld. Now, it's at this point that we need to talk about memory speed. When you're running integrated graphics, the GPU uses the system RAM as video RAM, also known as shared memory. This has 2 big disadvantages that we need to overcome. The first is that the GPU is hogging a bunch of RAM. The A9 Max can be configured in UEFI to use either 4 or 8 gigs of system RAM as video RAM. So if you've got 16 gigs of total RAM, you might be losing half of that to the GPU before you even boot up Windows. Thankfully, my A9 Max came with 32 gigs of RAM, which is plenty for gaming, so this isn't going to be a problem. But it is something that we have to consider. The second issue is RAM speed. Now on a dedicated GPU, you have really fast RAM chips. That's why it has to be soldered down directly next to the GPU, because GDDR is screamingly fast. DDR5 SODIMM at 5600 megatransfers, easy to upgrade and change, but not very fast. This is made worse on my A9 Max because Geekom supplied it to me with a single 32GB module fitted. This means single channel mode, which is going to murder performance even further. Now, the ethical reviewer move is to test the product exactly in the configuration that it was supplied in, but I don't need to run benchmarks and spend half an hour showing you the results of those to tell you that this thing is going to suck in single channel mode. So I took a bullet and I bought a 2-module kit for it. I did some testing in superposition to see what configurations worked best, and here are those results. Testing on the 1080p high profile, the A9 Max scored 2586 with 4GB of shared memory, and then 2606 with 8GB of shared memory. I then went to visit a friend and I borrowed his 96GB RAM kit, and that shifted the scores up to 3722 and 4280 respectively. So from this we can see that in single channel mode the GPU is completely bottlenecked by memory speed. Giving it more shared memory doesn't really help at all because it's not running fast enough to use it. However, as soon as we switch into dual channel, we get a 44% increase in performance. And then switching from 4GB to 8GB of shared memory took it even further. I can't afford a 96GB RAM kit, so I went and bought a 16GB RAM kit that was the cheapest one on Amazon. So with 16GB of total RAM, we're going to run into that problem I mentioned earlier, where with 8GB of shared memory, we're only going to have 8GB available for Windows. So I tried mixing the 32GB and an 8GB module for a 40GB configuration, and that got me a bit more performance than single channel, but less than a matched pair. I'm not 100% sure why I got that result. I expected it to be either the same as dual channel or the same as single channel, not somewhere in between. But in any case, from this point onwards, I will be testing using the fastest configuration I could reach for each test, and I'll add notes for what configuration I was using at the time. If you buy one of these things, you really want to make sure that it has a dual module RAM kit in it. And Geekom, you really need to sell this thing with the fastest memory you can possibly put in it. The performance of an iGPU lives and dies on the RAM speed. I cannot stress this enough. I'm going to give the A9 Max the benefit of the doubt by changing the factory spec because we don't learn anything by running it in single channel mode and seeing that it sucks. The CPU technically supports 8000 megatransfers, and I would love to see how it impacts performance. But high-speed SODIMMs are rare, and at the time of writing, we're in the middle of the 2026 RAM-pocalypse, so getting hold of exotic SODIMMs just isn't an option for me right now. But make no mistake, this is a product defect that needs to be different in the shipped version. Alright, let's do what we came here to do and run some games on it. To set some expectations, those superposition scores that we got in dual channel mode are already faster than an ROG Ally Z1 Extreme. And without having a Z2 Extreme on hand to test with, I'm guessing we're about in that ballpark. I'm going to start with a couple of indie games. These are going to be no problem, but I want to show them as an example of some easy gamepad gaming. You can treat the A9 Max like a console plugged into a portable screen or a desk monitor or even a TV for enjoying the many action platformers that are available on Steam. To use an example like Silksong, this action platformer will run on basically anything at hundreds of FPS, so performance is irrelevant here. You don't need power to run this game. Likewise, with a deck builder like Slay the Spire 2, as you can see, we're also running at hundreds of FPS with no problems. However, some indie games will have deceptively high quality 3D rendering, and these can catch out the lower power machines. Anno Mutationem blends 2D and 3D elements, making it tricky to run on integrated graphics. But the A9 Max still managed to hold about 60 FPS on high settings, which is the kind of target that I'd be aiming for on this class of GPU. So for most indie games, performance is not going to be a problem, so why bother testing them at all? Well, I like to remind people that games do exist outside of the AAA space, and you can spend a lifetime playing the thousands of beautiful and inventive indie games without ever needing a full-fat GPU. I think a lot of capital G gamers often forget this and just forget all of these games exist at all. And a computer like this is more than capable of running all of them. However, we are here to test more than just indie, so let's move on to esports games. Starting with Valorant, I've dropped into the shooting range with the graphics on 1080p high, and we're getting a solid 130 FPS downrange. Walking around outside, the FPS does swing higher up to 200, but this is probably because we're looking at the skybox. Even assuming worst case scenario though, I think 100 FPS on 1080p high is a given, which is a lot more than I expected, and it's a great start. Next I tried Marvel Rivals, and this was a bit of a hot mess, but it's also a good opportunity to try the different memory configs and other settings to see how they impact performance. Firstly, the game was basically unplayable at 1080p native, and it needs FSR, even on the lowest detail preset. None of the memory configs I tried could get above 30 FPS without it, so we'll skip the 1080p native results. Up to this point, I've been running 16 gigs of total RAM with 8 gigs of shared memory, but for Rivals, it seemed like I was really running out of system memory. So I swapped in the 32 gig module for 40 gigabytes total. It looks to me like Rivals is looking at how much system memory and VRAM you have, and then deciding on a fixed amount that it will reserve. 12 gigs of system memory isn't enough to push it into its high RAM setting, so we're stuck in paging hell, which destroys the 1% lows. Single channel mode will give us more consistent frames, but then we're back in the bottleneck hell and we fall down to 30 FPS. So the best I managed was a 51 FPS average, and if you're a casual gamer, you might be thinking, that's good enough. But with 1% lows of 14 frames a second, you're basically getting a stuttery mess. If you want to play Rivals on the A9 Max, then maybe you can drop to 720p, but right now it's the year 2026, and I think I'm already compromising by testing at 1080p. I'm going to call this a bust and move on. Unreal Engine 5 strikes again. Doom Eternal is a classic single-player performance test. This game is fast and violent. I'd like high refresh rate for this, but I would settle for a 60 FPS minimum. However, testing at 1080p native high, we're getting about 70 FPS, which is pretty great. If you wanted to hit triple digits, you could absolutely drop down to the medium or low preset and reach that, although the detail's going to start getting a bit gnarly for my taste. Either way, this is solid performance, and it shows that older AAA games are more than playable. I'm going to run one more game now, and that's Forza Horizon 6. Now, I didn't expect much from this because I thought this is a brand new AAA game, but as I started testing, I was pleasantly surprised. Horizon 6 scales down really well on low-end hardware, and at the 1080p native low preset, I got near as damn it 60 FPS, which I'd be pretty happy with. You could also get up to about 60 FPS with the medium preset and balanced FSR, but in my opinion, low native looked better. Racing games involve a lot of trailing edges that tend to catch out FSR and make a somewhat muddy picture, although the concrete jungle of this benchmark that we're looking at doesn't help here either. Still, I think this is a really great win, and I have to remind myself that this is mobile integrated graphics that I'm looking at here. This kind of thing was unthinkable 5 years ago. So, I've been pretty impressed by what's actually possible with the A9 Max. To summarize the whole RAM situation, the stock configuration of 32 gigs single channel is going to give you plenty of memory, and around the desktop and for most other things, that's fine. It's completely fine. However, it really hurts gaming performance. Ultimately, a 32GB dual channel kit would solve this problem entirely, and we wouldn't have to mess around fiddling with memory configurations. I did needle Geekom over this, but their hands are clearly completely tied by the current RAM situation. It's worth noting that older versions of this PC with the HX370 chip in it also have the Radeon 890M, and it should be pretty similar in gaming performance. Geekom tell me that it's shipping with dual channel RAM, so that's kind of an option if you like what you're seeing, but you're put off by the single channel RAM. Geekom pitched the single channel config as upgradable, and this isn't wrong. And in an era where a lot of RAM is going to be soldered in, having upgradable modules is good. But once again, an iGPU lives and dies on the RAM speed. So if you want to use the A9 Max for gaming, this just doesn't cut it with me. To figure out if any of this is worth it though, we need to talk about the price. Right now on the Geekom website, the A9 Max in the configuration that I've been testing with 2 terabytes of storage and 32 gigs of single channel memory it's $14.99. That's 1,700 USD. This is kind of like when GPU prices were sky high. The prices were completely detached from the actual performance of the product, and it's just going to depend on what deals you can find and when. I think the A9 Max is a really cool mini PC. The connectivity is great, the size and presentation is great, the CPU is fantastic. The iGPU is surprisingly capable to the point where I think I could just take this thing to a LAN party or use it in a hotel room as a super light setup and get by just fine. Geekom wanted me to do a gaming review, but the A9 Max is really more than that. If you use this as a console connected to your TV, you also have a really powerful media server or a NAS. It's got a good enough CPU to quite handily run Proxmox on it. I could see myself doing video editing on this and probably get more performance out of it than my 7800X3D just because of the 12-core 24-thread CPU. But in May 2026, it's impossible for me to say with a straight face that the price is right. As a product, I think it's really cool, and if we're lucky, the AI industry will explode at incredible high speed, so the prices of these devices can come back down to something more palatable. But until then, this price is a tough sell. I do want to thank Geekom for sending this one in all the same. They do offer an 8% discount using the links in the description down below, and they did hint at future sales events in the future, so check out those links to learn more about the A9 Max, and I hope to see you all again in the future. Thanks a lot, and bye for now.